And we are live. Welcome back in, guys. Trey Lowell here with Lowell Productions for episode number 3 of Lowell Talks. All right, that's a little bit over the top, but I have to give myself a little bit of applaud. I am excited. I have made my way through 3 episodes of this podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to spend a little bit more time than normal. We're going to be talking about cameras and different cameras. We're going to talk about iPhones, talk about action cameras, aka GoPros. We're going to dibble and dabble into DSLR and mirrorless cameras. And we will lightly touch on cinema cameras. They're a little bit out of my price range, but for some of you guys out there, you at least might be interested in what the heck some of these cameras are, what they will do, if they'll fit your needs. Coming up next, Lowell Talks Episode 3. All right, so for many people out there, when it comes to cameras, my goodness, there's just so much out there that it's a little bit overwhelming. And so I basically want to start from the very beginning, and then we will make our way up to the powerhouses that, I'll be honest with you, most of you guys that are listening to this podcast, while you might be interested in those cameras, I have a little bit of a different approach in regards to when to buy a camera and why. But rather than spending time on that, we're going to jump in the different types of cameras first, and the iPhone being the first. So iPhone, smartphone, you name it, the one item that I guarantee the vast majority of you actually have in your pocket either right now, or you're probably either watching or listening through that device. Now, why do I want to spend some time on iPhones? One being, man, over the past few years, iPhones, smartphones in general, the video footage is getting to a point where it's almost scary for someone like myself who does invest a lot of money into cameras. Now, that being said, am I really concerned? No, because the powerhouse cameras are going to be able to serve a different purpose and different functions that, to my knowledge, currently most iPhones are really just not going to be able to do unless you maxed them out and bought all these accessories and really kind of pushed it up into that kind of DSLR mirrorless camera price range anyways. So that is going to be one thing that we're going to disregard in regards to you can get it to that spot, but I still would argue my DSLRs or my mirrorless is going to crush a smartphone. Now, that being said, a smartphone is a absolute phenomenal first camera. And the reason that I say that is you already own it. Most of these have cameras on the front and the back. They have their built-in applications, which are definitely fantastic for your average consumer. Now, as you start to get more familiar with cameras, your smartphone, I would recommend dabbling with some of the apps that kind of, in a nutshell, just expand the capabilities of your phone or your camera and what it's capable of doing. One of them being Filmic Pro, that's kind of my go-to. It really just unlocks a lot of things that are very similar in a DSLR or a mirrorless camera or a Cinecam, that being like peaking, your scopes, even just being able to pull focus, and even your shutter speeds, things of that nature. And then you're going to be able to shoot a range of frame rates ranging from 24 frames upwards to even 120 frames on an iPhone, which is pretty solid. So, that being said, smartphones are an absolute valuable option. And for most of you out there, if you're even thinking about walking into Walmart or you're thinking about going into Best Buy and looking at their cameras, please take my advice. Master your iPhone or your smartphone. And then when you have kind of maxed it out and you've done everything that you're possibly able to do with it, then go ahead and start really considering making that next step to a bigger, better camera. And as we talk about other camera options, I want to kind of hone in on action cameras, which most people would be familiar with, like a GoPro. DJI Osmo has a kind of very similar version to the GoPro. Fantastic. I have a version called the Unreal, which is a very cheap model, but I come to find out gets very good results for its $155 price tag. So now, why would we even be talking about action cams? Well, most people, if they kind of don't either want to use their phone because they don't want to get wet, or they want the just usability of a GoPro, they see it on TV, I do genuinely understand why most of us get attracted to those type of cameras. Now, there's several pros and there's several cons, and many of the pros are that the usability is absolutely great. Stabilization on these GoPros, these on-reels, even the Osmo, absolutely fantastic. You're going to be able to shoot a ton of different frame rates on a lot of these different cameras. Battery life's pretty solid, and on top of that, they're waterproof, and they're pretty compact, so you can kind of take them and put them in some unique spots, and they're just overall very user-friendly. Now, some of the cons are going to be, in a nutshell, how do I explain this? When you're using a GoPro, the vast majority of everything is going to be in focus. Now, that can be a very good thing for docu-style, but if you're going for like a cinematic look, a lot of that kind of look and feel is going to come in the post-production, so in the editing process, whereas just shooting, you're pretty much just going to try to get things that are completely overexposed, and you're just going to try to get the best shot you possibly can and try to manipulate it as much as you can in post-production. But that being said, I just absolutely love GoPros and action cameras in regards to being able to just grab it, hit record, boom, everything's locked in. If you're able to get some ND filters or polarizers for your action cam, it can really take the video quality up quite a bit. And what I mean is, if none of you are familiar with ND filters, just imagine putting sunglasses on your camera. It's going to lock in colors. It won't be as bright and overexposed, and it's a nice little touch for these relatively cheap cameras that can really pack a punch, but also kind of are limited in their somewhat cinematic aspects that they bring to the table. Now, audio is usually pretty good on these, and as far as what GoPro's done and some of these other companies, I mean, pretty much you can throw them in their editing software, chop it up, boom, 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 you're ready to go. And they'll even do speed ramping for you and some of the stabilization. So they've really made it great for the user. So when it comes down to both smartphones versus action cameras, which I would kind of, if I were going to weigh them together, very similar what they're bringing to the table. But most of us already own an iPhone, that we don't already own an action camera. So if you're kind of reading the vibes here, I'm basically just saying spend that time on that iPhone, master it, learn to edit on it, buy a couple of accessories like a little tripod or ND filters, and literally maximize everything you can outside of that, because you're also going to learn a lot of the kind of necessities to cameras anyways with the iPhone. And like I said, you already have that in your hand. And as we start to take that next step, so let's say you've mastered your iPhone, you've really maxed out the GoPro, and you're kind of at this point either wanting to be more of a pro consumer, or maybe you're even in the space of, heck, I'm pretty damn good at this, people are loving what I'm doing, and I want to take the next step. So you're willing to invest. Now, this is where things can get kind of swirly, because there's so much out there on the internet. I think people just get bombarded, and kind of it's like user overload with everybody telling you what you should get. Now, I am going to start this off in regards to, as you do take that next step, there's going to be a couple of thresholds and kind of what I would consider user traps that I kind of see a lot of people falling into. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say you walk into Walmart or Best Buy. You're going to see Canon, you're going to see maybe some Panasonic, and you're going to see Sony. Now, I'm a little bit biased. I have owned every single one of those brands. My two current favorites would definitely be Panasonic and Sony. Canon's starting to lag behind quite a bit. So let's say you walk into those stores. Now, just going to be honest with you, most people tend to get their hands on Canon. I don't know why. I think a lot of it has to just do with marketing. People just know that they are getting a good product when they buy Canon, and there's a wide assortment of different Canon cameras for that like newcomer camera person, the person that's kind of really interested but maybe is a little bit gullible in regards to they just know it's better than their GoPro or their iPhone. So you walk into the store, you see the Canon, you see the Panasonic, and you see the Sony. Now these are the three powerhouses outside of, if you really want to talk about Fuji, or we want to talk about like Olympus, but you're not really going to find those, and very rarely are you even going to find a wide variety of Panasonics. Pretty much going to be Sony and Canon, and rightly so. They are both fantastic. I do happen to shoot with the Sony A7S II, the A7S III, and then I've also owned a Panasonic GH4 and 5 and a Canon 5D Mark III. I've owned a Canon T3i and a Canon T5i. So, that being said, I've had that wide assortment, and I've loved every single one of them. And if you do happen to buy a Canon, absolutely great. They're amazing for photography. Their autofocus is incredible, And I'll be honest with you, their color science is pretty solid for the average user that really can't go in and manipulate colors in the editing process. So Canon definitely scores mega points in that aspect. Now, that being said, a lot of these cameras are going to be in between the $500 all the way up to about the $3,500 range. That would what I'd be considering kind of like prosumer or people kind of jumping into that next stage. Now, Panasonic is kind of, to me, I'm a little bit biased. I absolutely love their cameras, and for that $500 range, especially coming in used, I think you can get a GX85, which imagine just a little pocket camera that can shoot 4K. It's got image stabilization, shoots fantastic photo. One of my best friends actually owns it and is always bragging about how small it is. It adapts with micro four thirds lenses, and just it's a powerhouse for such a small camera. So let's just talk in regards to that. That's a GX85. Now, I know that Sony and Canon offer just phenomenal products in that marketplace, but I'm more familiar with the GX85, and I do know it just packs a mega punch for $500, and that would be a camera you might see on the shelf, but honestly, you're not going to hear much about. Panasonic GH4, another example, an absolute powerhouse, exactly what I'm filming with currently, shooting 4K, shoots slow-mo, it's got the flip out screen, photos are pretty solid. Now, image stabilization on this camera, because it's so old, is kind of doo-doo brown, but if you get a lens that has image stabilization that is compatible with the Lumix, you're going to be pretty solid. And let's be honest with you, while stabilization's good, there's something to be said that you need to know how to work a camera that doesn't have just a gimbal or is just fully stabilized. If your first camera was a Panasonic GH5 with a 12mm to 35, the f2.8, that's just stupid smooth, and honestly, you wouldn't even really learn how to use a camera if that was your first absolute setup. So, now that we've talked about Canon, which is a fantastic option for first-time users, I would just say do your research in regards to possibly finding a refurbished or used model of whatever you see on the shelves. Save a great bang for the buck. And if I were going to bet, most likely if you really find a knack in photography or video and that's your first camera, most likely if you get good at it, you're going to take a step to the next model. That being said, that's going to be more up to you. So now let's talk Sony. And you know what? I don't own Sony. I shoot on Sony for one of my clients, so I've had an absolute ton of experience with them. And currently in that full frame, the A7S II, the A7S III, the A6400 I've been able to shoot on in the A6300. All of those are absolutely awesome cameras. They're pretty solid in low light, kind of the best situations that you're going to get for most cameras out there. Now, one thing I will say with the Sonys that I don't necessarily like would be battery life, and also would just be that it actually doesn't record for more than 30 minutes at a time, and I find that they overheat a little bit more comparatively speaking to the Panasonic and the Canons. Now, why do I bring up these three, and what am I trying to get to in this kind of $500 to $3,000 range? Now, what I would say is if you're just a photographer, the Canons, go ahead and get a 7D, a 6D, an older model Canon photography. It's going to be just fine for you. And if you really have some bang for the buck, go ahead and get a Sony, because those are rocking, and like I said, the low light's fantastic. Now, if you're looking for just video, now this is where a hot debate comes, and that's where I'm going to lean hard on Panasonic just crushing it for video. Now, a lot of the fanboys out there are going to say that the Sony absolutely destroys it. It's full frame. It's got better low light capabilities. And like I said, I'm shooting on both of these cameras regularly, probably the GH5 even more. The Sony, I'm at least shooting on it once or twice a week, shot several documentaries, things of that nature. The Sony basically makes me bulletproof in any situation. Now, if I'm walking into a situation where it's more of a controlled environment and I had those two cameras sitting there, there's no doubt in my mind I'd grab the GH5 just from the video quality. Just the 10-bit, the 8-bit, all the different resolutions, just whatever it puts out of that damn camera is just awesome. So now that's for a controlled environment. And like I addressed earlier, the Sony is going to be absolutely bulletproof. There's been plenty of projects where I've almost had to film in what I would consider almost the dark for most people, and the dang Sony always seems to come through. So please just take that in mind. Like I said, if you're more of a controlled environment shooter, Panasonic and the GH series is going to be solid, and it's going to be a great bang for the buck. And the Sonys are going to be absolutely bulletproof, a little bit more pricey. The A7 III body only, I think $1,900, which is extremely reasonable for what it's packing. So now that we've kind of made our way through that kind of 500 to 3,000 mark, the one thing I want to hone in on quickly is cinema cameras. And this kind of gets weird in regards to price and preferences and Hollywood standards, YouTube standards, basically all the damn standards that you can come up with. Now that being said, I have had the experience to shoot with a couple of Canon C200s, C300. I've shot with the FS5 and an FS7, that being Sony. And then basically outside of that, it's really just watching videos and hearing people's testimonials of like what they like and what fits their needs. Now, as far as cinema cameras go, we can go anywhere from like 4,000 upwards to like, you name it. You could get to like, I don't know, 200 grand if you want to go Alexa route and start decking it out. I'm not even going to dwell on that because it's something that I'm not even diverse in. But on that lower level of the cine cameras, from my experience and what I've heard through the grapevine, once again, the Sonys are packing a punch with the FS7 and the FS5. Now, those are going to be Super 35 cameras. In a nutshell, just a smidge below the full frame, but that being said, very similar to the full frame. And a lot of Super 35 is going to be what a lot of these Netflix documentaries and things are shot on. We're talking like the Red Ravens. We're talking like, I want to say the Panasonic Eva, whatever it's called, Evo 1. It seems fantastic, but not a lot of people have that camera, so you really can't get an understanding of what the heck's going on there. You have the FS7, the FS5, the Ursas, the Reds, the Panasonic, and at that point, and the Canon C100, 200, 300, all that. All those cameras at that point are for the big boys, and to be honest with you, I think your average consumer, from a YouTube, from a social media perspective, if you're shooting with that 500 to 3,500 range, you're already spitting out 4K quality that's pretty darn solid. So you know what, guys? That is my ramble jamble on cameras. I hope I gave you guys some insight into cameras, the different levels. Maybe we address some things that you might know, might not know. But that is Lowell Talks, Episode 3, Trey Lowell with Lowell Productions. And I am happy to see you guys, hear you guys. I don't even know for Episode 4. I'm out.